Well, the growth of the Indigenous visual arts market has been nothing short of amazing. It's like $400 million estimated recently. I think its development has seen a lot of money going into communities that never historically had money, and a lot of range of people, for instance women artists now, returning monies to their families. So I think through the art centres and how popular Aboriginal art has become, there's been a lot of benefits back to Indigenous family members. I do also think, though, it's an industry that's been marked with exploitation, and that's not just in the copyright issues, which I deal in every day. It's not like people are copying artwork from textbooks or art catalogues and putting them on carpets anymore. It's very much involved in the market and the way the art is sold. So I think things like the resale royalty, which is the right of the artist to share in the increased value of their artwork over time, are really good things for all artists, but particularly Indigenous artists. And I can see that the stake that Indigenous artists have in the visual arts overlapping into other areas of the economy, so it's had a marked impact. Yeah. Most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists who operate in the commercial world are confronted with the reality of, have to make a commercial decision of whether my art is disseminated widely, can it be altered and used in different contexts, whereas it may have come from a cultural source. That person might have had to negotiate use by a number of Indigenous elders that want to remain connected to it. So the challenge is there's a commercial opportunity, to put my art on a plane or on a banner or on the television, but for the Indigenous artists, they've always got to weigh up, well, what's the integrity? What am I, taking this story, this collective heritage beyond, its traditional settings? So that always comes up for Indigenous artists. And, it's not easy, I don't think, but it would depend a lot on a number of factors, and, whether or not it's a sacred work, to what extent that image or that knowledge has been made publicly available before, and a whole range of these cultural sort of factors that probably don't impact on other commercial decisions. So it's a very interesting challenge, because I do think there's been so many, Indigenous art being so lucrative, and Indigenous knowledge now can give rise to these great new drugs, patentable drugs and face creams and all of that. So the opportunities are there, but to what extent do you want to sell it or make it available and mass produce it where someone else can copy it and there's no recourse in even the copyright laws aren't perfect. And then you think, well, then cultural laws, customary laws, if these people are all over the world, how are they going to come under the jurisdiction of my, family or my clan? So it's a balance. But as more Indigenous people get into business, and that whole ethical approach that I think that a lot of Indigenous businesses who are asking, the questions of themselves, and through that, they're developing the ground for, a balanced approach to commercialisation of culture. The notion of copyright and authorship is a very Western legal concept. So the issue of how Indigenous people might collaborate or work together or use pre-existing designs that might be handed down through the generations is something that sits uncomfortably with copyright law. It has moved a lot, and there have been 2 federal court cases that have set the ground for expanding notions of copyright to protect Indigenous cultural interests. The thing that I guess needs more work is to empower those Indigenous people at the point of creation to think about, communal ownership. Is it my artwork, or am I collaborating with other authors, or am I drawing from Indigenous knowledge or Indigenous cultural expression embodied in my work that I have to attribute the clan or a community, or share royalties even with the wider group. So those sort of things come up in Indigenous art and creative practices, but in the strictly Western legal copyright sense, it's very much focused on individual rights. It is good for Indigenous people to engage in copyright industries for the economic returns. That's one level, and if you think that it is a right given to creators, giving them incentive to create more and that way, reap the benefits commercially, that's one way of looking at it. But I actually also see the non-economic benefits if you look at things like having a right of attribution and always being connected to a work, the sort of moral rights. I find them very important. In Australia, we've only had moral rights since 2000, but having that connection to your artwork or connection to your story is very important for Indigenous people. I do find that there's one thing to have the right and that link, but you have also got to practice and create new art, which is something, I've never really engaged too much in visual arts, but that's what I've always liked, stories, and the power of the story to link myself into my traditional connections. Even though I grew up in Cairns, my heritage is in the Torres Strait. I write very much about the Torres Strait Islander heritage and the stories that were told to me by my mother and my father. So I'm drawing that into a book that has copyright, all the time challenged by making sure that I get it right for her, because you don't want to cross my mother. But on the other side of things is that there's that pathway to my children, that I'm almost like a conduit for that continuing story, and I see that as my role. As a writer, if I can do that, and that's the art form that I feel comfortable with, I sort of push that into, maybe it's not push, maybe it's try and encourage my children to pick that up. I know writing is something I'm very passionate about, and I do creative writing. I've written a novel, Butterfly Song, which was published about 10 years ago. I'm working on one at the moment, another novel, but it's often hard to just get into it when you're working so intensely and running a firm and doing a whole lot of other things. One of the two things that I'm really proud of, though, is having written a children's reader with my daughter Tamina. We wrote What Makes a Tree Smile. That was when she was about 5 years old, so she's like now 14, and she's still really happy that it's still around and she gets royalties for that. And I just finished writing a book called Kin Island with my son Jakey, and we've had a lot of fun on that. And yeah, I just really like writing. Tell the story, this is what my mum told you. We sit around the laptop and, sort of say, is that word or this word, or, to draw a story. So it's the same sort of method, but we're using a different medium. And the other thing that I think to draw in the copyright is, it's something that could, once it's published, you worked on an outcome, and I know that my children might see it as something that it goes in a library and it'll stay there forever and be a testament to our ancestors.